Imagine a war that lasted nearly 3 decades. A war where ideology, greed, and power collided. Where global superpowers turned a nation into a battlefield. This is not just a story about war. This is the story of Angola. Angola, a land of immense beauty and wealth. Rich in oil, overflowing with diamonds, blessed with fertile land. But beneath this natural abundance lay something far more dangerous: division. Ethnic tensions, political rivalries. And centuries of colonial oppression had created cracks in the foundation of this nation. And soon, those cracks would shatter everything. For over 400 years, Angola existed under Portuguese rule. But this was not partnership, it was domination. Angolans were forced into labor, their resources extracted, their voices silenced. The land gave wealth, but the people lived in hardship. And as decades passed, resentment quietly turned into resistance. From the shadows emerged 3 powerful movements. The MPLA, driven by socialist ideals. The FNLA, rooted in northern ethnic support. And UNITA, led by the ambitious and calculating Jonas Savimbi. They all wanted independence. But they did not trust each other. And in that distrust, lay the seeds of civil war. In 1961, Angola erupted. Rebels rose against Portuguese rule. Plantations were attacked. Colonial structures challenged. Portugal responded with brutal force. Villages burned. Thousands were killed, fear spread across the land. The war for independence had begun. But independence would not bring peace. As the war intensified, Angola drew global attention. The Cold War had found a new battlefield. The Soviet Union and Cuba backed the MPLA. The United States and its allies supported opposing factions. What began as a fight for freedom was now a proxy war between global powers. In 1974, everything changed. In Portugal, a peaceful revolution toppled the dictatorship. Suddenly, the empire could no longer hold its colonies. Angola's independence was no longer a dream. It was inevitable. But one question remained. Who would rule? As the Portuguese prepared to leave, chaos filled the vacuum. The MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA turned against each other. Alliances shifted, trust collapsed. And the capital city, Luanda, became a battlefield. Independence was within reach. But unity was already lost. On November 11, 1975, Angola declared independence. The MPLA took control of Luanda and established government. But UNITA and FNLA refused to accept it. Within hours, the country descended into full-scale civil war. Freedom had arrived. But peace had not. Almost immediately, foreign powers intervened. Cuban troops arrived in thousands, backing the MPLA. South African forces invaded from the south, supporting UNITA. Weapons, money, and soldiers poured into Angola. What was once a civil conflict had become an international war. The capital became the heart of the struggle. With Cuban support, the MPLA secured Luanda. FNLA forces were pushed back. UNITA retreated into the countryside. But they were far from defeated. In fact, the war was only just beginning. Jonas Savimbi, a man of charisma, intelligence, and ruthless determination. He transformed UNITA into a formidable guerrilla force. Operating from the, striking unexpectedly. He turned weakness into strength. And soon, UNITA controlled vast parts of Angola. This was not a traditional war. There were no clear front lines, no safe zones. Ambushes, sabotage, surprise attacks. Civilians suffered the most. Families displaced, villages destroyed. An entire nation trapped in fear. South Africa entered the war with force. Fearing communist expansion, it backed UNITA aggressively. Its military clashed directly with MPLA and Cuban forces. The conflict escalated, and southern Africa became deeply entangled. Cuba responded with overwhelming support. At its peak, over 50,000 Cuban troops were stationed in Angola. It became one of the largest foreign military interventions in African history. The stakes had never been higher. One of the largest battles ever fought on African soil. Cuanavale. Explosions lit the skies, tanks clashed, thousands fought. In the end, no clear victor emerged. But the battle changed everything. It marked the beginning of the end of foreign dominance in the war. Years of conflict took a devastating toll. Millions displaced, countless lives lost. Infrastructure reduced to rubble. Landmines covered the earth, turning everyday life into a gamble with death. To sustain the war, UNITA turned to diamonds. These blood diamonds were sold on the international market. They funded weapons, prolonged violence, and deepened the suffering. Angola's wealth had become its curse. Peace was attempted, again and again. Agreements were signed, promises made. But trust was absent. And without trust, peace could not survive. In 1991, hope returned. The Bices Accords were signed. A ceasefire, democratic elections, a new beginning. For a moment, it seemed the war might finally end. In 1992, Angola held its first elections. The MPLA won. But Savimbi rejected the results. And just like that, war returned with even greater fury. In Luanda, violence erupted. Thousands of UNITA supporters were hunted and killed. The streets ran with fear. Any hope for peace vanished overnight. The conflict intensified beyond imagination. Cities were besieged. Supplies cut off. Civilians starved. This was no longer just war. It was survival. The Cold War ended. And global powers began to lose interest. Support faded, attention shifted. But Angola was still burning. UNITA faced growing pressure. International sanctions targeted its diamond trade. Isolation tightened around Savimbi. And the began to turn. Government forces launched relentless offensives. UNITA strongholds were attacked. Supply lines cut. Savimbi was running out of options. In 2002, it ended. Jonas Savimbi was killed in battle. The man who had sustained the war was gone. And with him, the fight began to fade. Soon after, UNITA agreed to peace. After 27 long years, the guns finally fell silent. What remained was devastation. Destroyed cities, broken families. A country struggling to heal. Peace had come. But at a terrible cost. With peace came opportunity. Oil wealth fueled rapid growth. Cities rose again. But inequality remained. The scars of war were not so easily erased. The Angolan Civil War is a story of power. Of foreign influence. Of human resilience. It reminds us that war does not end when the shooting stops. Its echoes remain, in people, in land, in history. Angola survived. But it will never forget. This is the Chronicles of African Wars. Where history speaks, and we listen. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because Africa's stories deserve to be told.